The most powerful man in the room was standing alone by the window, holding a glass of sparkling water he hadn't touched once all evening. Judge Naomi Whitaker noticed him the moment she walked in. It wasn't his height, though he was tall. It wasn't the suit, though it was well cut in the way that came from knowing what you were doing, not from trying to impress anyone. It was the stillness. Every other person in the Hargrove Foundation's annual charity gala was performing, laughing a little too loudly, angling their bodies toward whoever mattered most in any given conversation. This man was just standing there, watching the Chicago skyline like he had nowhere better to be and no one to prove anything to. Naomi took a glass of champagne from a passing tray and told herself she was only walking over because the east side of the room was less crowded. She almost believed it. "You've been holding that water for 40 minutes, she said. He turned. He was younger than she'd expected up close. Maybe early 40s, with dark brown skin and the kind of quiet face that didn't give much away. He looked at her with something she couldn't immediately name. Not surprise. Not the particular shine men sometimes got when a woman in a good dress appeared next to them. Just attention. Calm, unhurried attention. "I don't drink," he said, but it felt rude to stand here empty-handed. She laughed before she could decide whether it was funny. Naomi Whitaker, Elwood Crane. She waited for him to add something, a title, a firm, a connection to whoever had invited him. He didn't. "And what do you do, Elwood Crane?" "I teach 4th grade, he said, "over at Tilden Elementary on the south side." She blinked. Around them, the room was full of venture capitalists and hospital executives and at least 2 city council members. "How did you end up at the Hargrove Gala?" "My daughter's principal nominated me for the Foundation's Educator Award." He said it the way people say things they're still slightly bewildered by. "I didn't know it came with a tuxedo rental and a 4-course dinner. I thought it was a plaque and a handshake. Does the tuxedo fit at least?" He looked down at himself, then back at her. "The jack's a little short in the arms." She looked. He was right. And somehow that was the most honest thing anyone had said to her all evening. Naomi Whitaker had been a federal judge for 6 years. Before that, she'd spent 11 years as a federal prosecutor in Chicago's Northern District. The kind of work that left marks even when it went well. She was 47 years old, sharp in the way that came from decades of sharpening, and she had not been to a social event like this without a specific agenda in a very long time. The agenda tonight was the Hargrove Foundation's new Community Justice Initiative. Her clerk had suggested she come. She had told herself she was representing the bench. Both things were true, and neither was the whole truth. The whole truth was that Naomi Whitaker had been lonely for a while now, in the way that very busy, very capable people go lonely, slowly, without fanfare, until one day you realize you can't remember the last time you laughed at something before you decided it was funny. She didn't think about that when she crossed the room toward Elwood Crane. She thought about it later. Sitting in the back of a rideshare at midnight, watching the streetlights streak past the window. But that came after. They talked for an hour and 20 minutes. She knew because she checked her watch twice, once at 40 minutes, out of habit, and once at 80 because she couldn't believe it had been that long. He told her about his classroom, about a boy named Darius who had decided in September that reading was pointless, and by November had finished 2 chapter books because Elwood had made the mistake of mentioning he'd never read a book twice, and Darius had made it his personal mission to find a book good enough to change that. He told her about the way 4th graders thought about fairness, with a rigidity and a passion that reminded him sometimes of courtrooms. She told him she'd worked in courtrooms for 20 years, and he wasn't wrong. He asked her questions. Real questions. The kind where you listen to the answer instead of waiting for your turn to speak. He asked what part of the job she found hardest. He asked if she ever thought about the cases that kept her up at night. He did not ask about her salary or her influence, or whether she knew so-and-so at the federal courthouse. At some point, their conversation drifted from work entirely. He mentioned a podcast about the history of American infrastructure that he'd been listening to on his commute. She told him she'd grown up in a neighborhood where the infrastructure had never quite worked. Roads that flooded every spring. A bridge that took 11 years to get repaired after a crack was first reported. He nodded like he knew exactly which kind of neighborhood she meant, because he did. The room thinned around them without either of them noticing. When the foundation director tapped the microphone to call everyone to the dinner tables, Naomi realized she was still holding her original glass of champagne, now flat and warm. "I should find my seat," she said. "Me too." He paused. "It was good talking to you, Judge Whitaker." "Naomi," she said. He smiled for the first time. It was a small smile, not a performance, just something that happened to his face. "Naomi." She watched him walk toward the tables on the opposite side of the room and told herself that was the end of it. A nice conversation with a fourth-grade teacher who had short jacket sleeves. That was a fine way to spend the first hour of a charity gala. She told herself that 3 more times over the next 2 weeks. She looked him up. She was not proud of this. She was a federal judge. She had access to tools that no person should use to research a man she'd met at a party, and she did not use any of them. She Googled him like a regular person. Elwood Crane, Tilden Elementary, Chicago. The Foundation's Educator Award announcement had a short bio. 14 years in the classroom. Coached youth basketball for 6. Featured in a local paper piece 2 years ago about teachers who stayed in under-resourced schools when they could have left for easier posts. There was a quote at the end of the article. She read it twice. "My kids need to see someone who looks like them show up every single day. That's the whole job. Everything else is extra." She closed the browser and went back to the sentencing memorandum she was supposed to be reviewing. She opened the browser again 20 minutes later. The basketball coaching page had a photo. He was crouched down on a gym floor next to a kid who couldn't have been older than 9, showing him how to position his hands on the ball. The kid was grinning. Elwood was grinning too, the same small, real smile she'd seen at the gala. Naomi Whitaker closed her laptop and sat in her office for a while without doing anything in particular. The foundation sent a follow-up reception 2 weeks later, smaller, a thank-you dinner for the award recipients and their guests. Naomi wasn't on the list. She called the director, who was a former colleague, and asked if there was room for one more. She told herself she was supporting the Community Justice Initiative. She wore the dark green dress. Elwood was there with a woman Naomi's chest tightened to see, and then she got close enough to read the family resemblance and the tightness released. Same jawline, same eyes, maybe 10 years older than him. His sister, as it turned out, Renata. She was in from Detroit for a few days. Renata shook Naomi's hand with the focused attention of someone who had learned to read people quickly. "Elwood mentioned you," she said. "Did he?" Naomi said. "He mentioned the judge who told him his jacket sleeves were too short." "I only said they were short." He was the one who agreed. Renata laughed and touched her brother's arm. "I like her." Elwood's expression did that thing again, not quite suppressing a smile, not quite letting it out. They ended up at the same table for dinner. Renata excused herself halfway through the main course to take a call. Something about her youngest and a situation at school, and didn't come back. This left Naomi and Elwood at a table that gradually emptied until it was just the two of them, and a breadbasket neither of them was eating from anymore. "Can I ask you something?" Naomi said. "Sure, the article in the Tribune. You've had offers to move to better-funded schools?" He considered this. "A few, but you stayed. My kids are on the south side. The good schools aren't on the south side." He said it without bitterness, just as a fact, the way you state facts that make you tired and that you've decided not to be destroyed by. Somebody's going to be there. Might as well be me. She looked at him across the table. The candles had been burning long enough that they were starting to drip. Elwood, she said, and she didn't entirely know what she was going to say after that. Naomi, he said gently. And something in the way he said it, careful, like he was being honest about something that hadn't been spoken yet, made her stop. She waited. He looked down at the tablecloth for a moment. Then he looked up. How old are you, if you don't mind? 47. He nodded slowly. I'm 42. I know, she said. The foundation bio. Something crossed his face that wasn't quite amusement. Is the age a problem for you? She said it without hesitating. No. He was quiet for a moment. It's not the age, he said. She stayed very still. I want to tell you something, he said, because you've been honest with me, and you deserve the same back. He picked up his water glass, then set it down without drinking. My wife passed away 3 years ago, breast cancer. We were married for 9 years. Naomi said nothing. Her name was Constance. She was. He paused, not the way people pause when they're looking for words, but the way they pause when the words are right there and they're deciding whether to say them. She was the clearest person I've ever known. She always knew exactly what she thought and why. Our daughter has that same quality. She's 8. Her name is Bria. Naomi's throat was tight. I am not. He stopped again. I'm not closed. I don't think I'm supposed to be alone forever. I'm not sure Constance would have wanted that, and I've thought about it enough to have some opinion on what she would have wanted. A small breath. But right now I am still very much the father of an 8-year-old who lost her mother, and I don't have anything to offer someone like you that would be fair to either of you. The candle between them dripped wax onto the tablecloth. I'm not asking for anything, Naomi said. I know, he said. I know you're not. That's part of what I'm trying to explain. He looked at her directly. You're exceptional, Naomi. You walked across a room full of people who mattered. And you talked to me for an hour and a half about a 4th grader named Darius and a bridge that took 11 years to fix. And it was the best conversation I've had at one of these things in. Probably ever. And I noticed that. I'm not pretending I didn't notice. She waited, but I go home every night to a little girl who still puts her mother's photograph on her nightstand every night before she goes to sleep. And that's where I belong right now. That's where all of me belongs. He looked at her steadily. That's not a door closing on you. I want to be clear about that. It's just where I am. The room was almost empty. Somewhere behind them, a staff member was quietly stacking chairs. Naomi thought about the sentencing memorandums on her desk, and the way she'd Googled him twice, and the dark green dress, and the 11 years she'd spent building a career so formidable that being lonely inside it felt like an embarrassing thing to admit. She thought about what it meant that this man, who had nothing she usually looked for, no title that matched her world, no particular ambition to move upward, had told her the clearest, most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. How is she doing? Naomi asked. Bria. He blinked, clearly not expecting that. She's the smallest smile. She's doing better than I probably give her credit for. She corrects my spelling sometimes, which I think is a healthy sign. Good. They sat there for another moment. I'd like to be your friend, Naomi said. If that's something that works for you. No agenda attached. He looked at her for a long moment. Yeah, he said. I think that works. She thought about that dinner for a long time afterward. Not obsessively, she had too much on her docket for obsession, but in the way you turn a smooth stone over in your pocket without realizing you're doing it. There was something in the conversation that she kept returning to, not the part where he'd explained himself, but the part just after, when she'd asked about Bria. The way his face had changed, the way a different, lighter version of him had surfaced for just a moment in the candlelight. She had met a lot of powerful men in her career. Men who ran things, men who decided things, men whose names were attached to buildings. She knew how they moved through rooms, the particular confidence of people accustomed to space clearing in front of them. Elwood Crane did not move through rooms that way. He moved through rooms like a man who had decided, a long time ago, that what he was doing mattered whether or not anyone was watching. That was a different kind of authority. She'd spent 20 years in federal courtrooms, and she wasn't sure she'd felt it quite so plainly before. She did not call him. She had said no agenda, and she meant it. He called her 6 weeks later. "I'm not sure this counts as friendship or protocol," he said when she picked up, "but Bria has a school project about careers in public service, and her teacher suggested I ask around." A pause. "And I thought of you." "Of course you did," Naomi said. "Is that?" "Elwood. I would be glad to talk to Bria about her project." They met at a coffee shop on a Saturday morning, neutral territory, Naomi's suggestion. She had expected an 8-year-old and gotten something closer to a small, precise attorney. Bria Crane arrived with a spiral notebook, a pencil case, and a list of questions written in handwriting so neat it looked typed. She was slight, brown-skinned, with her father's eyes and an expression of focused evaluation that reminded Naomi of the first-year clerks who occasionally came through her chambers already too serious for their own good. "You're a federal judge," Bria said by way of greeting. "I am. Does that mean you're a judge for the whole country or just Chicago?" "Just the Northern District of Illinois. But federal cases can come from anywhere if they involve federal law." Bria wrote something in her notebook. "My dad said you're really smart." Naomi looked at Elwood, who had the expression of a man deeply committed to studying his coffee cup. "Your dad is kind," Naomi said. "He's also right, usually." Bria looked up from the notebook. "He's not always right about basketball. He thinks Kevin Durant is better than LeBron, and I think that's wrong. I don't follow basketball closely enough to have an opinion. That's okay. A lot of people don't." She clicked her pencil. "Can I start my questions now?" "Go ahead." The interview lasted 45 minutes. By the end of it, Naomi had explained the difference between civil and criminal cases, described what she did during a typical workday, and answered a question about what happened if a judge made a mistake that was so precisely worded. She briefly wondered if Bria had a future in appellate practice. When they left the coffee shop, Elwood walked beside her on the sidewalk while Bria ran ahead to look at a dog tied to a parking meter. "She's extraordinary," Naomi said. "I know." His voice was simple and full at the same time. "I tell her that. Her teachers tell her that. I try to make sure she doesn't only hear it from people who are supposed to say it." They walked a few more steps. "She asked me yesterday if you were Daddy's girlfriend," he said. Naomi kept walking. "What did you tell her?" "I told her you were a friend who came to talk about her project. And she accepted that. She wrote it down in the notebook." He glanced sideways at Naomi. "She writes everything down. I don't actually know if she accepted it." Ahead of them, Bria had apparently charmed the dog's owner into letting her hold the leash, and was now walking a large golden retriever with the focused satisfaction of someone completing a task she had always known she was capable of. "She has her mother's handwriting," Elwood said quietly. Not to Naomi specifically, just out loud, the way you say things that are both painful and good when you've learned to let them be both. Naomi didn't answer. There wasn't anything to answer. They stood on the sidewalk and watched Bria walk the dog in a careful circle, talking to it in a low, serious voice, explaining something. The November air was cold and clean and sharp. The months after that were not a love story. Exactly. Or not the kind that announces itself. Elwood called when he had a legal question for Bria's follow-up assignment. Naomi called when she found a book on urban education policy she thought he'd find interesting, and then wasn't sure if that was too much, and then decided it wasn't and called anyway. They met twice more for coffee, once with Bria and once without. They texted occasionally, small things, links to articles, A photograph Bria had sent her father of a passage she'd underlined in a book Naomi had recommended. Naomi went home to her apartment each time and sat with the particular feeling of something important happening at a pace she wasn't used to. She was a person who moved through the world decisively. 30 years of legal practice had made her that way. Waiting did not come naturally to her. But here was the thing she understood, sitting in her apartment in the dark after a late evening on the bench. Elwood Crane was not asking her to wait. He hadn't promised her anything. He'd told her the truth about where he was, which was a thing most people never did, and she had told him she could be his friend, and she had meant it. What she hadn't anticipated was how much she would come to mean it. She was not waiting for him to become available. She was discovering slowly what it looked like to care about someone without needing them to be something specific in return. It was not a feeling she had a lot of practice with. It was not comfortable. It was also, she thought, real in a way that very little else in her life currently was. In February, Bria got sick. Nothing serious, a chest cold that turned into a respiratory infection that kept her home from school for 9 days and required 2 trips to the clinic. Naomi knew because Elwood mentioned it in a text. Bria out of school this week. Nothing scary, but she's frustrated. She doesn't like being still. She sent a package the next afternoon. 3 books she thought Bria might not have read yet. A puzzle of the Chicago skyline, a card that said, simply, "Get well soon." Courts don't run well without smart people. She didn't think much of it. It was a reasonable thing to do for a friend's child. She thought about it differently when Elwood called 3 days later. She set the puzzle up on her bed and worked on it for 2 days straight, he said. His voice was a little different than usual. Quieter. She kept the card on her nightstand, next to Constance's photo. Naomi didn't say anything. "I want you to know," he said carefully, "that I see what you do. I don't take it for granted." "Elwood, I'm not saying anything that changes what I told you in November." He paused. "I'm just saying I see you, and I wanted you to know that." She sat with the phone pressed against her ear in her dark office for a moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. Spring came. The community justice initiative that had brought her to the Gala in the first place launched its first program in 3 South Side schools. Tilden Elementary was one of them. Naomi attended the launch event. Elwood was there with Bria, who was well again and had opinions about the new after-school program that she had written down in advance. They stood together in the gym while Bria argued policy with a program coordinator twice her size. "She's going to be formidable," Naomi said. "I know." He was smiling, the real smile now, the one she'd started to be able to read. Her therapist says she processes things by organizing them. The notebook, the lists. It's her way of holding on to things she can control. Naomi watched Bria. Smart therapist, good one. A beat. I started going too, after Constance. It helped. She looked at him. "I'm telling you because you're someone I'm honest with," he said simply. "And talked because—" He stopped for a moment. "I've been thinking about something. I'm not ready to say all of it yet. But I wanted you to know I'm thinking." Naomi's chest was very still. "Okay," she said, for the second time in the same voice. He nodded once. That was enough. The photograph was on the bookshelf in Elwood's living room. She saw it months later, the first time she came to the apartment for Sunday dinner, which had become a standing thing sometime in July without either of them formally testing it. Constance Crane looked out from the frame with a directness that matched her daughter's completely. The photograph was not hidden or turned away. It was just there, on the shelf, the way the people we have loved are always just there, present in the rooms we build after they've gone. Bria was in the kitchen, nominally helping with a salad, and actually conducting a monologue about her summer reading list. Naomi stood in the living room for a moment and looked at the photograph. She did not feel what she'd expected to feel. There was no rivalry in it. She felt, instead, something closer to recognition, an acknowledgement of a woman she'd never met, who had raised a daughter of incandescent quality, and chosen a man whose goodness had stayed intact through grief, who had held his daughter's hand through the worst thing and come out the other side still the same person. She understood in that moment why she'd walked across a crowded room to talk to a man standing alone by the window. Not because of what he could offer her, not because of what she was looking for, because people who stayed the same under pressure were rare, because she'd spent her career surrounded by people who became, under pressure, something harder, or smaller, or more self-protecting than they'd started out. And here was a man who had been through something that would have diminished most people, and had emerged from it quiet and whole, holding the pieces of his life with both hands, not asking anyone to fix what couldn't be fixed. "Dinner's ready," Bria called from the kitchen, and then, "Naomi, can you ask Dad if 8 minutes is enough time for the garlic bread, because he said yes, but I don't think he checked the timer." Elwood appeared in the doorway. He looked at Naomi standing in front of the photograph, and something passed across his face. Not surprise, not discomfort. Something gentler than either of those things. 8 minutes is probably fine, he said. But she's right that I didn't check. Then check, Naomi said. He went back to the kitchen. She heard him check the timer, heard Bria say, "I knew it," heard Elwood's laugh, his actual laugh, the one that sounded like relief. She stood in the living room for one more moment. In the house of a man she had come to know slowly and well, listening to the ordinary sounds of a Sunday evening, and understood that some things did not need to be rushed into shape. Some things were already, quietly, becoming exactly what they were meant to be. Drop a comment below. Would you have waited, or would you have walked away? And where are you watching from tonight?